Hey, we're back in the wood shop today, and we got more Halloween projects to do. So let's get right into it. The first thing I'm going to do are some easy wooden pumpkins, and I'm cutting a 2x4 into 9-inch pieces. I'm using the first one as the measure for cutting the rest. You could also use a stop block here if you were batching these out to sell and cut a bunch of them all at once. I'm just making one, so I'm cutting 8 pieces at the 9-inch length. I'm using a 2x3 for the center one, which will be the stem piece, and I'll cut that about 12 inches long on the long side and cutting one end at about a 15-degree angle. You could also just use another 2x4 for that, but I think the 2x3 fits the overall proportion a little better. I'm cutting the corners off all the 9-inch pieces at a 45-degree angle, and I'm not really measuring. I line up the first board with the point on the saw fence and make a mark to line up the rest of the boards for making those cuts. You wouldn't really have to cut them all, just the ones that will show, the edges, outer edges, but it's just easier to cut them all, and then you don't have to keep track of what board goes where. There's that 2x3 in the center. I'm starting out gluing up a couple sections just to make it easier to assemble the whole thing. I've got a 2x4 clamped to the bench just to have a straight edge reference to align all the boards as I put them together. I'm just using glue and clamps at this stage. I'm doing the center section, and I'll do one that is just 2 boards put together, and like I say, this is just to hold some of it together and make it easier to assemble so I don't have to try to line up and hold all the loose boards at once. After those sit in the clamps for a while to dry, I take them out of the clamps and start assembly. I even remembered to hook the air hose up to the brad nailer this time. Looking it over to see which side I want facing out. Then I apply some glue and put it in place. And I'm just lining this up by eye. That'll be close enough for what this is. Then I shoot a few brads in, trying to get 1 or 2 into each board. Putting the last piece on this side, and a little extra glue never hurts. Give it a quick check to make sure my micrometer is still in calibration, and I nail it on. A few extra brads from the back. Now my straight edge isn't high enough to be effective, so I stand it up to get all the boards even at the bottom, and so it sits steady. This is a nice size for the porch, and it's heavy enough that it won't be blown about by the wind too. Got a little glue to clean up, but it's done. That's the big one for the porch, and I'm making another one also out of 2x4s, but smaller. These pieces that I'm cutting the corners off of are about 5¼ inches long, and I'm lining up with that same mark on the saw here for these cuts. Now time for assembly. The 2 other pieces here are 7¼ inches long and just square cuts on those. And there's no particular reason for these measurements. I just sort of did it by eye and proportion and then measured it after, and that's what it came out to. It's not imperative that you use the same exact measurements. I just mentioned them so you can if you want to, but you can also modify it slightly if you want to change the proportions to suit your taste. Notice I used a 2x4 with a flaw, some wane along the edge. No big deal, as that can be the back. These outside pieces I'm just lining up by eye, centered on the board I'm gluing it to. Then, of course, I got to double check myself to make sure my eyes are still seeing straight. Yep, good to go. So I throw a couple clamps on it and set it aside to dry. Notice I didn't build a stem piece on this one. I'll add that later. Now I'm making a smaller one, and this is small enough you could even use it inside the house for display or decoration. I'm using some pieces I ripped down to 1 inch wide, but you could use 3/4 inch wide stock and just reduce the height a bit to keep it in proportion. These pieces I'm mitering here are 4 1/4 inches long, and I also cut 2 pieces to 5 1/4 inches long, and just square cuts on those. I'm lining up with the same mark on the saw, and this results in a little more aggressive amount of stock removal on the narrower piece, but that's fine. The center piece, which is also the stem piece again, is cut to about 7 1/8 inches long on the long side, and I did about a 30-degree angle cut on the top. The other one I cut the angle on the stem at 15 degrees, so you can see it's not critical what angle you use. Even though I ripped these pieces down for this smaller pumpkin, I rounded over the edges with my sander to match the factory edges. I think it looks better to have the rounded edges on these pieces for gluing up to make these pumpkins. It gives them a little more character and definition, I think. This is pretty much the same routine as the last one, gluing together pretty much by eye and throwing a couple clamps on and setting it aside to dry. I'm just going to hand whittle a stem for the medium-sized pumpkin out of a piece of 1 inch square trim I had left over from the house build. You could also, again, just use a stick from the woods like I did on the jack-o'-lanterns. But I thought I'd show you a different method on this one. After I got it whittled down to my liking, I just cut off about a 2 or 3 inch section. I'm drilling with about a 3/4 inch Forstner bit here, and that's about the size of my stem after I whittled it down out of that 1 inch square piece to round. And I'm angling it a touch and going about the depth of the cutter, maybe a bit deeper. Pretty good fit, but if it was tight, I'd just whittle it down a little more. A little glue in the hole, a little glue on the stem, little finger spreader action, and it's a pumpkin. Well, sort of. So after the glue had a while to dry, here are the 3 different versions of the wooden pumpkins. I put some medium brown stain on the stems while they were drying also, and I'll put some finish on later so they look a little more pumpkin-y. Now for some spooky stuff. I'm going to make some ghosts. I'm starting out with some standard 1x6 stock here, and I'm just going to freehand draw some eyes and a mouth on it and try to make him look spooky. This is a prime example here of a non-artist trying to do something mildly artistic. After I get the face on, I make a ghostly shape on the top. I don't know what you'd call that. A sock top? Anyway, I'm going to drill holes to get the jigsaw in there and cut out the shape. I'm making 3 ghosts, and I'm not going to show you cutting out every one. I made them with different faces and different heights, but the same method on all 3. After the first one, I moved to the workmate for the jigsawing. It gives a little more support being able to saw in that open section in the middle and having the board supported on both sides instead of just hanging off the side of the bench. I have a couple of these things that I've owned for years, and believe it or not, they're still available. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check them out. I try to always do that for the stuff I use in my videos and stuff I recommend. Anyway, I cut out 3 of these and also cut out a skull. Same process on that. Freehand drew it and then cut it out with a jigsaw. I then burned around the eyes and nose of the skull to make him look a little more ominous, and now we're ready for some finishing. I got the pumpkins ready for finish by taping off the stained stems with some blue painter's tape. Starting off with the skull, and I'm using some white latex paint thinned down with water to use it more like a stain. And I'm brushing it on and wiping it off because I want more of the wood to show through and give it more of a bone-like hue. I'm doing the inside of the features, but not worrying about the back. Then for the ghosts, I'm brushing on the same thinned down white, and I'm not wiping it off. I want them to appear a little more white, but at the same time, I want a bit of the grain of the wood to show through too, to give them a little texture. And I did all three with the same finish. So there's the rest of my decorations for Halloween. First, we got the three different pumpkins in three different sizes, small, medium, and large. These two out of 2x4s, and well, one 2x3 on this one. And using the whittled stick for the stem on that one. And then that one out of smaller pieces that you could use inside the house even. Then we have the ghosts in the background there, and those are just out of standard 1x6 material from the lumber yard. Just drew out the pattern, the faces, and cut it out with a jigsaw. Pretty straightforward. Finished that off with some craft paint, or actually it was just latex paint thinned down with water. And same with these. This one and this one was with craft paint thinned down, so you get a little more grain showing through. This one is spray painted with the spray can orange. And then I did a couple of projects off camera, just because it's the same method as the ghosts, drawing out a pattern, cutting it out with a jigsaw. So I didn't think you really needed to watch that. We have the scared black cat for Halloween, and just cut that out of 1/4-inch plywood. You could use any material you want for that. And then we have the ominous looking skull over there. That's out of 1x material also. And put the finish on that with some thinned down latex paint, and brushed it on and then wiped it off because I wanted a little different tone on that, more of a bone looking color. And then I wanted the ghost to be a little bit whiter, so I just brushed the finish on there and didn't wipe it off. So there we are. Hope you liked them. As always, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.